Hello everyone, and thank you for choosing my channel as your daily dose of entertainment. I never thought I would see the day where Emmanuel Macron, of all people, is coming out and calling against cancel culture. He is complaining that certain social science theories are being entirely imported from the United States, and they are hurting what he considers to be the France nation's heritage and identity. And in a way, I kind of see what he's talking about because we get the same thing happening in Romania. You get certain American social theories that are being imported and they do not fit the culture at all. Like they're not even looking or caring about examining Romania's culture. They just bombard you with American bullshit. Perfect example is the abolition of gendered language. Like in order to make trans people feel more comfortable, I suppose, we need to abolish gendered language. Well, I guess you can do that with the English language. Good luck doing that with Romanian language. Because Romania is a Latin language. And in Latin languages, just like in Spanish, all words are gendered. It's why Spanish people really hate it when bourgeoisie white twats say Latinx or Latinx. It scratches your brain if you actually speak Spanish. It doesn't fit. Makes no sense. And this is just one example. Like you get so many social science theories that are being applied to it, and they're trying to penetrate the Romanian culture. But it doesn't make sense. And most of the times, the words don't even have translations into Romanian. Like they use the English words, you know, they say patriarchy, or if they try to translate it, it sounds like patriarchatul. Like what the fuck? So I get that, but like a lot of people on the internet are complaining and they're pointing out that this is not actual American ideology. And in a way, they're kind of right, okay? So where did this intersectionality find its roots from? Like, where did it all start? And from my personal experience, I think it all started from the Frankfurt School. Now, the Frankfurt School studied various social theories and social studies, and they were very critical of two things. They were critical of capitalism and they were critical of communism. They liked Karl Marx's idea that the world should have equality. And they viewed that capitalism does not provide that equality. But they also viewed that the way Karl Marx was trying to achieve the equality to be wrong. Because Karl Marx focused his entire theory on economics. So Karl Marx viewed that the only difference between a factory owner, the bourgeoisie, and the oppressed, the factory worker, has to do with wealth. It's all about the money. It's all about the class. So if you abolish class, if you manage to remove money from society and everyone is going to be equal in terms of wealth, then you create equality. Now, the people at Frankfurt School noticed that this didn't happen in the West. It didn't happen in countries where you have a strong middle class and a possibility for the little guy to climb the ladder. They weren't interested in Marxism. They loved capitalism because they viewed that they have a better life than their fathers, and their fathers had a better life than their grandfathers. So they viewed it as a system where you can climb. And because of this, the people at Frankfurt School didn't really appreciate this. And they still wanted to make everyone equal, but they realized that maybe economics is not the way to do it. Maybe there might be a different thing that can make people equal. And they concluded that, okay, well, maybe culture is to blame. Like maybe people aren't equal because of cultural issues. And they looked at different nations and they said that in many nations there are different cultures of people and you have minorities. Whether the minorities can be because of different races, ethnicities, or sexual orientations, or gender. And maybe like if you focus on this, if you focus on culture, then everything will become equal. Now, as they're developing these theories and as they're writing these theses, there is a little bit of a political shift in Germany at the time. There's a little bit of a mustache man that's climbing the ranks, and he didn't really appreciate the ethnicity that these gentlemen at the Frankfurt School had. So many of the people at the Frankfurt School find themselves fleeing into the United States. And once they reach the United States, they go towards Columbia University, as well as other universities, but Columbia used to be the main one that had many of these thinkers. And here they start publishing books. Like, for example, there's this guy, Robin Arnott. Okay, you can find him on Google. You can read his books. In fact, I suggest that you actually read the books of these people. And he writes in a book called The Authoritarian Personality, where he describes that parenthood, pride in one's family, Christianity, traditional gender roles and attitudes towards sex, love of one's country, all of these things are pathological in nature. So you should move away from them. Then you have people like Herbert Marcuse, which talks about repressive tolerance. And in Herbert Marcuse's view, he views that society is going to be oppressive towards minorities by its very design. And the rule of law in a society is also focused at maintaining the status quo. So a minority cannot possibly manage to escape its oppression through normal means. So he actually considers that when the minorities go out and they commit violence or they protest in a manner that's unsavory, we should be tolerant towards that. Like that is definitely something to be tolerant towards, but you shouldn't be tolerant when the majority, for example, protests even peacefully against ideologies that are perceived to emanate from the minorities. This is a lot difficult to explain in a small video, but I think like that's the basis of what Herbert Marcuse says. I mean, here's a quote from his book, which says that the small and powerless minorities which struggle against the false consciousness and its beneficiaries must be helped. Their continued existence is more important than the preservation of abused rights and liberties which grant constitutional powers to those who oppress these minorities, right? So that's like what he tries to explain. And this is where we notice the start of what we consider today the woke culture. It's summarized more as critical theory. And from my personal experience, this is where it has its roots from. So when Macron says that this comes from America, I guess he's partially right, but you need to take into account that a lot of these university professors at the time took much inspiration from French philosophers as well as German philosophers. So in a way, it started in Europe, but then it moved towards America. And I guess through social media and through the internet, like newspapers like Vice, Vox, and other publications, it managed to make its way back into France. Now, the problem with this ideology is that normally it would not resist scrutiny. Like any place that you would have the free market of ideas, this type of ideology can be criticized and deconstructed, and you can make the arguments that this is not really helping minorities in any way. Thomas Sowell does a good job in saying that this type of ideology actually hurts minorities, because you have to take into account the people making this ideology, they weren't part of the minorities that they were representing. Like, they never polled or surveyed or even cared to ask about what the minorities want or want to talk about, right? But it is what it is. And the only reason it exists is because of cancel culture or persecution of ideological opponents. That's why it exists. Because if you look at social media, who has trust and safety councils and whose members are heavily influenced by parts of this ideology, they will promote speakers of this ideology. They will champion the speakers of this ideology, while they will shadow ban or outright ban people that criticize this ideology. And you notice that their members often become violent because, again, like think the repressive tolerance type of behavior, right? So it's members, when they get someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, right, which is a gay Jewish person, married with a black man, like he fits all the check boxes to the type of people that they claim to represent. When he goes to Berkeley University to just have a speech, right, like he doesn't do anything, he just wants to talk, and just by appearing there without even beginning his speech, like they don't even know what he's going to say, they burn down the university in order to make it so that he cannot go there and speak. Ben Shapiro also, wanted to go to universities, and he was told that he needs to finance security fees, not because his supporters are violent, but because the students at the university threatened the university with violence. So that's what it's happening, right? Like it's a very authoritarian, it's a very bullying mob tactic ideology, very similar to Marxism in a way. which is why many people call these people Marxists, because they desire equality, but the criticism is not really accurate because they're not into economics. Like, they do not care about wealth, they care about culture. And this is why Macron is taking a stand against it. Because it's not grassroots, it's pushed by powerful institutions, and it brainwashes influential teenagers. And yeah, I do view it that when you have writers of this ideology that calls parenting, and they call love for one's country, and all of these things, they call them pathological in nature. Yeah, it's not really a healthy ideology. And again, like, if you were to have free speech and honest conversation, there are studies that show children who are born in the traditional family are much better off than the ones who aren't. And you have studies that show that one of the best ways to fight against poverty is through marriage. It kind of makes sense. You don't even need a doctor in a lab coat to explain this. 2 incomes in a household is much better than 1. Finding a job requires, many times, social connections. Well, now you don't just have your social connections, you have your spouse's social connections as well. There's many ways why you can explain why marriage is actually uplifting people from poverty rather than suppressing them. But if you want a world with equality, if you want a world where everyone is equal, then obviously the kid who is born an orphan is not going to have the same start in life as the child of Bill Gates. And since it's very difficult to uplift that orphan child into the same status as Bill Gates' children, it's much easier to lower Bill Gates to the point where he is at the same level as the orphans. And that's the ideology if you want to believe in equality, right? Which, in my opinion, is not a goal we should try to go towards. Because on a slave plantation, if you think about it, most people are equal. Like 99% of the people are slaves and they're equal. No, I think equality is a horrible thing. What I do think is good is freedom and liberty, which is something that you don't get to see in the newspapers anymore. You don't get to see the left championing anymore. When's the last time you even heard in the newspaper anyone talking about freedom or liberty? Which, in my opinion, is a glorious concept that we should move towards. Well, equality is an absolute utopia that can only be achieved by harming people. I mean, in the same household, 2 twins that are genetically identical are not going to be equal in life. One of them is going to have more than the other. If you can't do that in a household, how can you do that in a country, or, as the Marxists view, in the entire world? It's completely insane. Equality should only exist as in equality under the law. The same principle should apply to everyone, and the same rules should be applied to everyone. But other than that, no, I disagree. I think equality is not desirable. I'm willing to have someone to change my mind. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the comment section.